All right. Good evening, everybody, or hello, everybody. This is Dr. Perrino. I'm basically going to go over a quick review for Unit 17 endocrine system. There's really not much to say about the endocrine system because, as you know, as you go through the readings, that there are a lot of big words, a lot of names, a lot of locations, how one hormone will affect the release of other hormones. So it's kind of important for you to really just study and read the chapter in its entirety. But I'm going to give you some areas to focus on. If you had me last semester, I did this last term and kind of gave you some tips or pointers on where to focus your attention as you go through the reading material because there's a lot. There's a lot. So for the endocrine system, I suggest perhaps creating flashcards so that you know if you have hormones coming from anterior pituitary versus posterior pituitary, releasing hormones, and who they're going to release to from the thalamus, and so forth and so on. Just some ideas or some thoughts that you could get through this chapter. So again, this is not a comprehensive review. It's a review based on some tips, okay, but you're responsible for all the readings as you make your way through the course, or through the chapter, that is. So in neuroendocrine cells, basically definition, like what is a neuroendocrine cell? What's their function? Okay, neuroendocrine cell is pretty much a cell, right, that if you take it apart, neuro and endocrine, they kind of work together to, it's going to go ahead and do something with the hormones, right? I can't tell you what, because pretty much it's in the readings. ADH versus oxytocin. Okay, so knowing where they release from, what's interesting about ADH and oxytocin is that they are chemically similar in structure. Though they have different functions, okay, they are similar in chemical structure because of the fact they perhaps, it's because of where they're stored and released from. So something to think about there. Be familiar with the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. I know in the book it's a chart. We come down this way and we go that way and come down. There's different pathways of different portal systems. So be familiar with different portal systems. Anterior pituitary gland hormones. Again, like I said before we started, it's all about hormones. It's all about where they come from and their function. So I really can't really get too specific because in the general of it all, it's all about the hormones. Posterior pituitary hormones. Be familiar with those as well. Basically, when it comes to the hormones, where they come from, how are they released, who releases them, and where do they go? What's their target organ is basically something to think about as you go through all those hormones. Gonadotropin releasing hormones, again, that's kind of specific, but if you just think of releasing hormones in general, okay, like TRH, right, thyroid releasing hormone, what is that going to do for you? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Who does it affect? Some disease processes, I apologize for the video cutting off the word disease, but acromegaly, Cushing's disease, Addison's disease, Cushing's syndrome, Graves' disease, dwarfism. How do these conditions arrive? What's lacking in some of them, or what's produced in excess in some of them? What structures are involved? What changes over time? Basically, it's pretty much whatever is written in your textbook. Pancreas and glucagon. A little specific there, but we know the pancreas does release some hormones of its own other than, of course, digestive enzymes, which you'll learn in the digestive system. But we also know that the pancreas has a huge role in producing hormones. And as we look at pancreatitis or pancreatic cancer, not only are we disrupting gastrointestinal issues when it comes to pancreas not working properly, but we also look on the grand scale of blood sugar. How does the pancreas affect sugar levels in the blood? And that the fact that it's not only an exocrine gland, exocrine meaning digestive system, but it's an endocrine gland. It's probably one of the only dual organs in the body. But the pancreas does have a role in producing hormones. That's why it's in the endocrine system, because it's both endocrine and exocrine in nature. So be familiar with what it produces, and when it does produce, what is its target? Like, why is it producing glucagon, for example? What's its function there? What are those beta cells for? Diabetes mellitus, diabetes insipidus, non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, or insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, right? There's About three, diabetes, DM1, DM2, and DI, right? Diabetes mellitus 1, type 1, type 2, and diabetes insipidus. Know the difference between the three? I didn't type all three out because I figured you figured it out when it comes to diabetes in general. Diabetes mellitus type 1 versus type 2 versus diabetes insipidus. What hormone is not released during insipidus? Matter of fact, if you drink alcohol, and you notice when you go out partying maybe, or you go out with some friends and you have a little too much to drink, you end up going to the bathroom a lot of times. It's because alcohol turns off the release of a certain hormone from a certain area of the pituitary gland that is kind of mimics diabetes insipidus. So that's why most of the time after you drink a lot of alcohol, you do urinate clear, right? And you're urinating out water. So kind of a little tip there for you, right? So when you are going out or know somebody who's going to the bathroom all the time because you're drinking a lot, it's because you're turning off a certain hormone. That's kind of related to diabetes insipidus. So check it out. Calcium metabolism, calcitonin, PTH, parathyroid hormone. So basically this is something I want you to kind of get a grip on, is how is calcium monitored in the body? If there's less blood calcium, what hormones involved? What hormones involved to excrete calcium to decrease blood calcium levels? What hormone is released to increase blood calcium levels? What hormone is released to activate osteoclasts in order for you to obviously degrade some bone calcium, some minerals to put back into your blood to raise calcium levels? Like, what is calcium's importance? Why is it important? If you don't have enough calcium in your blood, what system is affected? Right? Think nervous system. When it comes to endocrine system, I have a little blip on this. What is the relationship between the nervous system and the endocrine system? Okay, more on that later. So calcium metabolism, just know who increases blood, or not who, what increases blood calcium levels, what decreases blood calcium levels, and how it does, basically with our hormones, right? Biogenic amines, this is just a category of hormones or agents that you are going to come through, are going to see as you go through the readings. So basically, maybe a question of which of the following is not a biogenic amine? That could be a question on the exam, right? Positive versus negative feedback loops. That's probably the first thing you hit in the endocrine system, which it is the first thing. It's homeostasis, right? Negative feedback loop versus positive feedback loop. Positive feedbacks, think about oxytocin and uterine contraction. As the head pushes on the uterus for the baby to dilate that opening, the more pressure on the uterus, or the exit, if you would, that positive feedback increases oxytocin, which then goes ahead and contracts the uterus even more, and more contraction, more pressure on the uterus. The more pressure the head puts, the more oxytocin is released, the more it contracts. And it's a positive cycle. And then that positive cycle turns off once the head is passing through and the baby is about to be birthed in the canal. T3 versus T4, right? If we had a look at the two different, well, they're not that different, but T4 is like 90% of all thyroid hormone. T4 is 90% of all thyroid hormone, where T3 is just a hormone that affects target organs. Right, you release T4, 90% of all thyroid hormone is T4. The other 10%, if you would, is just T3, which is its job is to go off to a target organ. And what they have in common, right, the 3 and the 4 is basically the iodine atoms, right? So that's what those numbers represent, just in case you're wondering. How are hormones transported in the blood? If we think about a hydrophobic hormone, because hydrophobic doesn't like water, whereas we have a hydrophilic transporter, get my hand in there, talk with my hands, right? Hydrophilic, one versus the other. If we transport hormones through the blood, we have to look at the concepts of hydrophobic versus hydrophilic, water not liking and water liking, water disliking, if you would. So think about the transport of hormones, how they transport it. And again, think about hydrophilic versus hydrophilic. One word. Right, my concept here is the ASE. It's an enzyme, right? Phosphodiesterase. Excuse me. Think about enzymes. What are the roles of enzymes? As you go through the readings and look at different hormones, we know we need enzymes to break things down. So what is the role of phosphodiesterase, as well as other enzymes? Again, this is the nervous system versus endocrine system, right? We know these are both integrative systems, and they're both communicating systems. One's fast, one's slow. One does electrical impulses, one does hormones. But they all have a commonality, right? The nervous system uses calcium. The endocrine system uses calcium. The endocrine system regulates calcium. If you can't regulate your calcium in your blood, then you can't regulate your nervous system. So there's a huge relationship between the nervous system and the endocrine system, and it's important for you to understand the differences. But together, they're integrative and communicative. That's their job. They integrate systems together, and they communicate with systems together. Or they allow communication between those 11 systems that you learned in part 1. And the basic functions. I didn't list all the hormones, but you know there's a lot of hormones out there. So PRL, LH, GH, TSH, TRH, thyroid hormone, growth hormone. I can't even think, there's so many. CRH, okay. This one thing here is, what is the major function of thyroid hormone? Just something to throw out there. You may want to think about that. But in general, you should know where they come from, where do they go, how they're released, why are they released, and the total end of it all is, what's the purpose of releasing these hormones at whatever time it is to be released? This is where good flashcards come into play. Seasonal affective disorder, think melatonin, serotonin, think all those other hormones that we haven't touched on in this, but you'll read about them. Understand the endocrine system and its response to stress. What hormones are released, and in what steps are they released? There's a couple of questions on the exam that may ask you to, give you a certain pathway, and you got to pick the correct pathway of things being released. In response to stress, how does the endocrine system respond? In the response to cold weather, what's going on? Even in the response to infant suckling, okay, as from when breastfeeding, what's going on in the mother? What's going on in the child? Most of the time, right, we know the suckling, it's a reflex for the child. It's a suckling reflex. But it's a positive loop for the mother, right? It's a positive loop. The more milk being taken from the mother, the more letdown occurs in the mother, the more hormones are released to increase that production, or continually increase the production of milk, so there's something for the child. So what is the endocrine system response to those three, and maybe some more? So that wraps it up, the endocrine system. Again, the endocrine system is sure to read the chapter, which you already did because we're on a different chapter now, but make sure you read the chapter, take notes, understand the pathways, who are the big players, what they do, where they go, and how they get there. Any questions, concerns, or comments, please feel free to contact me. And if not, I will see you in Unit 2. All right, thanks.